without further ado, please welcome to talk about developing a legal and regulatory framework for international medical marijuana industry, Courtney Betty. Courtney Betty, ladies and gentlemen.
Good afternoon. It's great to be here, and it's just fantastic as I've watched the continuity of our presentations this morning, from we started with the minister and with Yuval, the minister talking about her vision, Yuval talking about the legal and regulatory framework. We've heard about irrigation, and we've also now heard about the investment opportunities. Well, underlying all of this, because everyone here, whether you're a scientist, whether you've got some peripheral element that you're looking at to bring to the industry, whether you're a grower, whether you're an extractor, what do you do without a proper legal framework? We heard from the investment group. I mean, that's what everyone needs. And so it's critical that we understand what that legal framework. I think the question that was asked and some of the uncertainties that we're seeing in the United States has to be mentioned. We don't know where the United States is going to go. And unfortunately, they've been a big player in deciding where things go. I'm an attorney by background, worked for the Department of Justice in Canada. So at one point I was actually prosecuting drug cases, including marijuana. 4 years ago, I decided to pursue an opportunity when Canada decided to create a legal framework that allowed for import-export. At that time, there was only 3 countries in the world that did. I approached the government of Jamaica, and working along with the government, I was fortunate to be able to help to create a legal framework for import-export in Jamaica. I think the key part of it is that we have to understand that this is all committed back to the 1961 convention, the United Nations Convention. And what it does, it allows countries to use cannabis for medical or for research purposes. And there's an established framework, and there's a lot of attempt and a lot of fight as to trying to change this framework and to try and change the UN treaty, which many countries have already signed on to. And so part of the challenge is either we change the treaty or we find a way to work within it. It's interesting as you talk about the business model. What is the business model? According to the INCB, which is the United Nations organization responsible, for this year, 2017, it's estimated that there's a world demand for about 700,000 pounds of marijuana. What does that mean? That means that countries that are signatories to the treaty has submitted what they expected their demand is going to be in terms of the usage. So if you're looking at 2017, that's your market that you're looking at, and you can work it out from there. And the list of countries are quite large. Canada, Colombia, you could look at all that as well. They're all signatures. It's kind of amazing though, because it's almost all the countries in the world are now beginning to look at medical marijuana. Whether or not they have a formal program, they're now beginning to look at it from a research purpose. And the top 4 countries, Canada, we're at 21%, Israel 2.6%, the US 10.8%, and Colombia 13%. Colombia is kind of interesting because that was a surprise for me and maybe for you as well, whereby the government has said to the cartel, listen, we're going to take over this industry and we're going to create a legal framework, and they began to do that. But I also think, this is 48% of the world demand is top 4 countries. We haven't even started looking at all the other countries that are now coming on board. So that demand is expected to grow. And we're now seeing many other countries, Belgium, Uruguay, Virgin Islands. Almost every day you're hearing another country that's now looking to create this legal framework. Because without a legal framework, you have a choice. You're either going to step outside the convention and then you're in breach, or you're going to have to come up and comply with the convention. We heard a little bit about GW Pharmaceuticals, and they're interesting because once you can go through and you go through all the steps of a pharmaceutical product, the fact that it has cannabis or THC doesn't really matter. You're now able to trade. But for many individuals and companies, that's a high road, that many challenges. GW has been able to go through, do all the research and go through FDA approval, and that's a long-term process. Where does it all go? I mean, Jamaica, fortunately for us, on February 24th of 2015, the government of Jamaica did pass legislation. And what was creative about it, and the Minister of Justice at the time, Mark Golding, who I worked along with, we really tried to figure out how do you, in a country where many of you probably thought, well, What do you mean legalization in Jamaica? That was already legalized. Well, actually wasn't. Marijuana, ganja has been an integral part of Jamaican environment for many years, but in order for us to participate in this international industry, we had to create a legal framework that complied with the United Nations requirements. So we're now ready. So what did they do in Jamaica that was great? There's a couple of things, because part of it is all of us, different countries, you've got to take into account the social conditions. Many countries want something different. Colombia wanted to deal with the drug trade. They also wanted to create opportunities for small farmers. What the government did was, first of all, we decriminalized 2 ounces. So if you go to Jamaica, you're now able to, and you have 2 ounces, you're not going to be criminally prosecuted. And that, again, is part of the issue of the United Nations Treaty. Very important. I've got Russ Ivey here. If you could stand, he's a member of the Cannabis Licensing Authority, representing the Rastafarian community. So we created within there a framework for sacramental use. So if you're a member of the Rastafarian community, you can now use medical marijuana or marijuana in general as part of your sacrament. And critical for many of you here is that there's now a legal and regulatory framework that allows for the development and commercialization of medical marijuana. So the Cannabis Licensing Authority is now in place. They issue license permits to individuals in all different sectors. There's different types of licenses, whether you're a cultivator or processing, transport license, retail license, tea shops. So there's now an entire framework that's now in place in research and development. Many of you think of Jamaica, well, Jamaica's there, Bob Marley and all the rest of it, and Peter Tosh. And that's great. But what many of you don't actually know is that Jamaica is one of the few countries in the world that in 1984, we actually wrote within our law a provision where medical marijuana was excluded from the definition of ganja. So Jamaica was actually the first country in the world to have created a legal framework for medical marijuana. And this goes along with it. I mean, the United States government says there's about 15,000 hectares that's been grown in Jamaica. That's their figures in 2015. If you know Jamaica, it's probably double that. And so there's, again, a tremendous supply of raw material that's there within the country. There's a brand that goes along with Jamaica. And there's also a knowledge in terms of how to grow. But it's critical that we also understand that Jamaica has also played a lead role in terms of the medicinal and the scientific. These 2 gentlemen, Dr. Albert Lockhart and Dr. Manley West, you probably have never heard of them. Well, they actually developed the first 2 medicines in the world from cannabis. And the first product was developed in 1976. It's called CannaTech. And CannaTech is for glaucoma. It's there, it's prescribed, it's used in the pharmacies, it's sold throughout the Caribbean. Asthmasol has been around since 1987, and that's also sold in pharmacies. You get a prescription for it, and as well, very, very widely used throughout the Caribbean. So Jamaica has a history of already developing these products in this area. Where do we go from here? And I think many of you are kind of looking. We heard, a question was asked by Kevin. What is the biggest challenge that Israel faces? And Israel, in my view, is the world leader in terms of the research, the technology, and all those other aspects of it. But we now have, as I started off, the United Nations Treaty that actually prevents and limits the movement of medical marijuana. And in many cases, we're really talking about plant material. Once you start getting into extracts and different value added, it becomes a little bit easier. But at the same time, you now have a challenge. How do we begin the actual trade? And one of the approaches we feel is to look at taking your intellectual property, your technology in all the different areas. We've partnered with the University of the West Indies, the University of Technology. There's units that are there. There's actually an institute set up at the University of Technology now for cannabis research, for product development. A great deal of that focus is really looking at pain relief, opiate reduction, which is a major problem that is now facing the world, and we'll hear a little bit about that from one of the world leaders, Dr. Yasmin Heard, tomorrow. What's our mission? I mean, I represent Timless Herbal Care after helping the government in terms of with the legal and regulatory framework. At the same time, we've built a company. We've had the top scientists, doctors, and we've created a framework for that. I was touched about 2 years ago in Jamaica where I recognized that there's a major problem in the country in terms of people, if you were in the hospitals and you didn't have the funds to be able to pay for medicine, you'd actually be sitting on the sidelines in the hospitals and potentially could die. We began to work in terms of developing very rudimentary pain relief. One of the young ladies that we helped that had stage 4 cancer, we reduced her opiate use from 22 painkillers a day to 2. And so that's when I became convinced that there's some possibilities in being able to do this. So at this point, we're really the leading medical marijuana company in Jamaica. Our success is really about partnering. We strongly believe that in order for all of us to be successful, we've got to reach out in all the different countries, and this is what's great about CannaTech. This is why we're here, to say to individuals, if you're in the industry, here's an opportunity for partnership. The key part of it, and we heard a little bit about it this morning, is clinical trials. I say to people, I would hate to give someone a product that I would not be prepared to give to my daughter. In order for me to do that, I need to have the science behind it. I need to know how that product is grown. I need to ensure that there's no pesticides, no contaminants. And so the clinical trials part of it is something that we're focusing on to be able to work along with different entities, whether it be Mount Sinai, the leader in New York, and other organizations. Come to Jamaica. We have an infrastructure that is there that you can bring your intellectual property, your formulations. We've got tremendous knowledge. We've been using marijuana now for so many years. All of that infrastructure is now there in place for you. And the other opportunity is how to grow. So we can bring your strains and be able to grow them in a different environment. What does that leave you with? And critical as well as the legal framework that we have to be able to import and export. So what's the vision that I have? And one that I'm hoping that you will participate in. First of all, Israel is the world leader. You've got tremendous technology, whether it be growing, whether it be data analysis, the medical research that we've heard about. By looking at Jamaica, Jamaica is already, according to the United States government, the largest importer of marijuana into the United States. Now we want to make it the largest legal importer of marijuana, right? But we also have as well the rest of the world. You know, you've got Latin America, you've got Europe, you've got Africa. Those are huge markets for your businesses, no matter what you're doing. And we would like to be able to play a leading role in being able to expand that. And so it's a race. It really is. Things are moving fast. Even from the time I was here last year, things are moving very fast. And all of us are thinking, well, there's going to be gold at the end of the rainbow. But it's kind of interesting as I listen to the speeches today, because what's very clear is that no one really knows where this is going to go. No one knows who's going to come out of the block, who's going to be the leader. And so we have to be prepared in terms of where do you hedge your bet? Where do you begin to place the emphasis in terms of your investment dollars? Right now, I say Jamaica. We've reached out to Israel. Our prime ministers have had discussions, as you've heard from Yuval this morning, in terms of creating a relationship. And so we would like to invite you and other individuals work along with CannaTech to come to Jamaica, conduct your research, look at clinical trials, and especially if you have a concern in terms of pain relief and opiate reduction, we believe that those kind of partnerships will create the movement that's going to be required. I want to thank you very much. I don't want to exceed my time for giving me the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Courtney Betty, ladies and gentlemen.